fans of the strange, dark, and mysterious. If you're into stories that make your skin crawl and keep you up at night, then buckle up, because this one's a doozy. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Next story. The doll. In late October, a county employee opened a sealed evidence crate and found a child's doll that was never logged. Claire Benson was 31, a county records archivist in Binghamton, New York, assigned to digitize retired evidence inventories. She arrived with Jonah Price, 34, an evidence technician, because the storage annex had recent break-ins. Their goal was simple: create a clean list and move low-priority items to a new shelf row. The annex smelled like wet cardboard and disinfectant, and the overhead lights clicked on with a delay. In the back corner, they found a crate stamped with a faded case number and an intake year written as 2009. The crate's tag reportedly matched a missing child investigation, but state records listed no physical evidence under that number. Claire checked archive notes from the county clerk, and the handwriting referenced a doll recovered near a creek. Jonah pulled dispatch logs from a shared drive, and the call summary mentioned a search party and a found item bagged. Still, the official evidence ledger showed nothing except a line that read "removed for review in 2011. When Claire asked who reviewed it, the answer depended on which copy of the ledger she opened. Inside the crate sat a cloth doll with yarn hair and a cracked plastic face, dressed in a homemade blue smock. There was no name tag, no evidence seal, and no chain of custody card taped to the lid. Jonah photographed it, and his camera timestamp later conflicted with the annex clock by nearly 20 minutes. Claire noticed the doll's hands were stained, like rust or dried clay, but the fabric looked recently washed. A note card was tucked under the doll, and it listed only one word: Lila. Claire searched the county file from 2009 and found a child named Lila Garner reported missing near a riverside park. The case narrative said Lila was 6, last seen after a fall festival, and her mother worked nights at a nursing home. Witness statements conflicted about clothing color, and one account claimed Lila carried a doll that looked similar. Investigators never confirmed the doll's origin because the recovery site was trampled by volunteers before tape went up. Some locals claimed the doll belonged to a different child, and that rumor never fully died. Jonah checked the annex's access logs, and there was no sign anyone opened that crate in years. Yet the crate screws were bright, and the wood around them showed fresh bite marks from a drill. Claire asked maintenance for work orders, and none listed that corner of the room. The annex supervisor insisted the crate was moved during a mold cleanup in 2019, but the cleanup report named a different aisle. Dispatch logs from the cleanup week showed an alarm call, and the responding deputy wrote that all doors were secure. That note did not explain the new screws, and it did not explain the doll's clean fabric. They carried the doll to a metal table, and Jonah placed it beside evidence bags for photographing. Claire stepped away to scan a folder, and Jonah turned to connect his camera to a laptop. When he looked back, the doll was sitting upright, even though he left it on its back. He did not claim it moved by itself, and he later said the table vibrated from a passing truck. Still, the laptop file shows a photo taken seconds earlier, and the doll appears on its back. A second photo taken right after shows it upright, and there is no hand in frame. Claire wrote a short incident note for internal tracking, careful to avoid dramatic language that could trigger unnecessary complaints. She also emailed her director, attaching photos and the crate tag, asking for guidance on chain of custody repair. The director replied with a single question: "Where exactly did you find that?" Claire answered, and then the director asked her to stop work and lock the annex until morning. Jonah listened, and he called his precinct contact to ask if the case number should be reopened. The contact reportedly said the number was flagged years ago, but no one could explain why. That night, Claire looked up the old detectives involved, and most had retired or died. One name remained active in state records, a former lieutenant who now worked private security in Syracuse. Claire called him, and he sounded tired before she even finished her first sentence. He said he remembered the Garner case, but he denied any doll ever being booked into evidence. He also claimed the crate number belonged to seized electronics, not a missing child file. Claire checked the ledger again, and the electronics line appeared only in one copy, not the others. Records conflict like that are common in scanned archives, but the timing made her pause. The next morning, Claire returned with Jonah and a third person, Marisol Haynes, 28, a county IT contractor tasked with auditing access permissions. Marisol's goal was practical: confirm who touched the digital ledgers and when they were modified. They unlocked the annex, and the crate was still on the table where Jonah left it. The doll, however, was inside a plastic evidence bag sealed with a barcode strip. None of them remembered bagging it, and the barcode did not match any county inventory sequence. Marisol scanned it anyway, and her software returned no record found. Jonah suggested someone came in after hours, which would mean forced entry or a key used off the books. Dispatch logs showed no alarm trips, and the annex's camera system was offline for a scheduled upgrade. Marisol checked the upgrade ticket, and the time window was changed twice by an unknown admin account. That account name did not exist in state records, and it did not appear in the county staff directory. Claire tried to treat it as a clerical error, but the new bag looked factory fresh. Even the bag's adhesive seam smelled like recent plastic, not dust and age. They moved the doll and crate into a secured room at the main county building, and Jonah signed a temporary custody form. Claire placed copies of her notes in a shared folder, and she printed a paper backup for the file cabinet. 2 hours later, the shared folder vanished, and the paper backup was missing from the cabinet. Marisol pulled audit trails, and the deletion came from Claire's own login. Claire was at lunch when it happened, and her phone location later placed her across town. Marisol told her the system can be spoofed, but she also said this looked deliberate. Claire asked for older backups, and Marisol recovered a partial archive that included a memo dated 2011. The memo said the Garner file was reviewed for transfer and the doll was removed for lab consultation. There was no lab name and no receipt, only a signature that looked like the retired lieutenant's initials. Claire compared the initials to payroll signatures found in state records, and they did not match. Jonah called the state lab, and the receptionist said no such consult existed under that case number. Investigators never confirmed where the doll went because the paper trail stopped in mid-sentence. Over the next week, Claire interviewed 2 retired clerks who remembered unusual requests during the Garner search. One clerk said a man in plain clothes demanded access to evidence shelves, claiming he had federal clearance. Another clerk said the same man returned a day later and she heard him arguing about a doll. These accounts reportedly were never written down because supervisors told staff not to create new paper. Claire found no federal badge record tied to the described name, but the description matched a local deputy who later resigned. Records conflict again, and the people remembering were speaking after many years. Still, both clerks independently mentioned the word Lila. Jonah decided to rephotograph the doll under controlled conditions, using a stabilized tripod and a time-synced clock. He placed it on a foam block, and he filmed a continuous shot while Claire read case excerpts aloud. The film showed nothing moving, but it captured faint tapping sounds at irregular intervals. Jonah said it could be the HVAC duct settling, and the building is old enough for that. Yet the tapping lined up with moments when Claire said Lila's name, then stopped when she paused. That pattern could be coincidence, and no investigator put it in an official report. A week later, a county courier delivered a padded envelope to Claire's desk, with no return address and no postage stamp. Inside was a photocopy of a child's drawing, showing a doll near a river and a dark shape in trees. The drawing was dated 2009, and the handwriting matched a sample from the missing child's school file. On the back, a typed line said, "Keep it sealed and stop digging." Claire reported the envelope, and security reviewed cameras that cover the mailroom. The footage was missing for the exact hour the envelope arrived because the server hard drive failed. Marisol inspected the camera server, and she found the failure was not random. The hard drive's error logs showed a forced shutdown command issued from a workstation at the Annex upgrade station. That station was locked in a closet, and only two keys existed, one with facilities and one with Jonah. Jonah was documented at court that morning, processing unrelated evidence, and his badge scan confirmed it. Facilities claimed their key never left the ring, but no one could prove it. Claire asked for external help, and her director refused, citing liability and budget limits. In state records, the Annex upgrade was listed as completed early, even though Marisol still had open tickets. Claire then requested the original Garner case file through formal channels, and she received a thin packet missing key witness pages. She compared it to an archived note scan from a county file from 2009, and the missing pages existed there. Those pages mentioned a volunteer who found a doll by the water, then refused to give a statement. The volunteer's name was crossed out in ink, and the ink bled through like it was applied later. Jonah searched the name anyway, and it belonged to a man who died in 2019. His death certificate listed drowning, even though he lived far from open water. Investigators never confirmed any connection, but locals in Binghamton still talked about that death. On a Friday evening, Jonah stayed late to move the doll into a state evidence locker, following a new directive that appeared in his inbox. The directive referenced state policy, but Marisol later confirmed the sender domain was slightly misspelled. Jonah said he noticed the error only after he arrived at the locker room and found it unlocked. He placed the bag doll inside a bin, and he logged the placement on paper because the terminal was down. When he returned the next morning, the bin contained only the empty bag, sliced cleanly along the seam. The paper log was gone, and the terminal now showed the bin was never used. Claire demanded a meeting with county leadership, and she brought printed screenshots of audit trails and dispatch logs. The room was quiet as she spoke, and she kept her voice flat to avoid sounding theatrical. Leadership responded with a new order: stop referencing the Garner file and focus on current digitization targets. They said the doll would be transferred to an off-site facility, and they refused to share which one. Claire asked for a chain of custody form, and the director said one would be generated later. No form ever appeared in the shared system, and archived notes of the meeting were not saved. State records later showed the transfer as completed in 2020, which was not the year it happened. Months passed, and Claire tried to close the loop by filing a public records request under her own name. The response packet reportedly included a single page stating the doll was destroyed as contaminated material. The page carried a supervisor's signature, but it did not match any signature on file for that supervisor. Jonah quietly obtained dispatch logs for the destruction date, and the logs showed no transport call, no escort, and no facility intake. Marisol searched the barcode again, and the number now returned a hit linked to an unrelated burglary case. That hit appeared only after her query, then vanished when she refreshed. Records, conflict, and the system never explained why. In the following winter, a reporter asked about the Garner case during a community forum in Broome County. A sheriff's representative said the case remained open, then corrected himself and said it was closed by lack of evidence. Claire sat in the audience, and she wrote down the wording exactly for her own files. Later, the forum transcript posted online omitted the exchange, replaced by a note that audio was unclear. Claire checked archived notes on the forum host's site, and the audio clip was present there. The clip included one more line, a request not to mention the doll, followed by a pause. No one claimed that pause meant anything, but it became part of local talk. Claire kept working, and she did not publish accusations because she could not prove intent or identity. Jonah transferred precincts, and Marisol took a new contract out of state, leaving only partial documentation behind. The only lasting artifact was Claire's personal notebook, with dates written out and copies of county file references from 2009. In the final pages, she described a last search through the annex, where she found the crate lid, but not the crate. The lid had a new barcode sticker, and under it she saw the same handwritten word, Leela. Some locals claimed the doll would always return, but investigators never confirmed any return at all. Next story. The Mirror. On a rainy Thursday in Asheville, North Carolina, a routine estate pickup reportedly turned into a case with conflicting records. A 32-year-old antique dealer named Nolan Price arrived for a listed wall mirror and left with questions. Dispatch logs later showed 2 calls about shouting, yet no one was ever charged. Investigators never confirmed what caused the panic, but archived notes kept resurfacing in county files. Nolan ran a small resale shop, and he specialized in estate cleanouts for families selling older homes. He was there because a probate attorney hired him to remove items before an appraisal. State records showed the house belonged to a retired nurse who died in 2019. The nurse had no children, so a distant cousin in Georgia handled the property. The cousin wanted everything cleared quickly, since the roof had begun leaking during spring storms. The house sat on the edge of a wooded slope, a quiet neighborhood with narrow roads and steep driveways. Nolan parked beside a sagging carport and carried moving blankets toward the side door. He noticed the power was on, which seemed odd for a vacant estate. Some locals claimed the utility had been shut off weeks earlier, yet the porch light still glowed. Nolan later told a deputy he assumed the realtor had arranged a temporary service. Inside, the air smelled like damp paper and old detergent, and the hallway carpet felt slightly wet. Nolan followed a printed inventory list, moving from room to room with his phone flashlight. The mirror was listed as 19th century style, walnut frame, front tall. He found it leaning against a wall near a coat rack wrapped in plastic sheeting. The plastic was taped tightly, as if someone wanted to seal the glass from air. Nolan cut the tape and peeled the sheeting back. Then he stopped and stared at the surface. The glass looked unusually clear for its age, with no spotting or haze. He shifted his stance and watched his reflection move, but he said it seemed delayed by a fraction. That detail sounded impossible, so he did not mention it to the realtor later. He only noted that the mirror felt heavier than expected, like it had stone hidden behind it. Nolan lifted the frame and walked it toward the doorway, careful not to scrape the molding. Halfway down the hall, he heard a soft tapping behind him, like fingernails on wood. He turned and saw the coat rack swaying, though no window was open. Reportedly, he then heard a voice say his name, spoken from the direction of the mirror. Nolan dropped the frame onto the carpet and backed away toward the kitchen. At 3:17 that afternoon, county dispatch logs recorded a call from Nolan's cell phone. The caller said there was someone inside, and he requested an officer immediately. 2 minutes later, a second call came from a neighbor who reported yelling and a crash. When deputies arrived, they found Nolan standing outside barefoot, breathing fast, and holding his keys. The mirror lay face down in the hall, and the taped plastic was back in place. Deputy Kendra Shaw, age 41, wrote that Nolan kept repeating a single phrase. He said, "I saw her in there, and she was behind me at the same time." Kendra asked him who he meant, and Nolan described the deceased nurse from a framed photo on the wall. Investigators never confirmed how Nolan recognized her, but the photo was visible from the entryway. Nolan insisted the woman's mouth moved inside the reflection, even though the hallway was empty. The initial search found no intruders, no forced entry, and no open windows that could explain movement. Kendra noted that Nolan's hands had small cuts, likely from tape or splintered wood. She also noted a faint chemical odor near the mirror, like cleaning solvent or alcohol. Nolan claimed he had not used any cleaners, and there were no supplies nearby. The deputy advised him to leave the item and return later with the realtor present. The realtor, a 28-year-old named Marla Vance, arrived within the hour and confirmed the job details. Marla said she had not entered the house that day since she assumed Nolan would handle removal. She was surprised to see the mirror still there since it was the first item on the list. Marla reportedly suggested they skip it and focus on other rooms first. Nolan refused and insisted the mirror should be photographed for the file, then left untouched. Marla took pictures for the estate report and sent them to the attorney, then she locked the house. That night, she emailed a brief note that mentioned the mirror's wrapping and unusual weight. In archived notes, she also mentioned a prior showing where a buyer complained about headaches near the hall. That note was not in the final listing packet, and records conflict on whether it was ever shared. The attorney later told investigators he only learned about the mirror after the deputy call. 2 days later, Nolan returned with a friend named Hector Mills, age 35, a part-time mover. Hector came because Nolan wanted a witness and extra strength for the lift. They arrived mid-morning with a dolly and straps, and Marla unlocked the door again. The mirror was still in the same spot, and the plastic wrap looked newly smoothed. Some locals claimed the plastic had been torn when Nolan fled, but photographs show it intact. Hector later stated the mirror seemed normal, and he laughed at Nolan's concern. He unwrapped a corner and tapped the glass with a knuckle, then he flinched as if shocked. Hector said it felt icy, even though the house was warm for late spring. Nolan watched Hector's reflection and said it looked slightly off, like the angle was wrong. Marla told both men to stop playing around and just move it out for the sale. As they lifted the frame, the mirror suddenly tilted and thumped against the wall, leaving a shallow dent in drywall. That impact should have cracked the glass, yet it did not chip or splinter. Hector swore he heard someone whisper from inside the frame, but he could not repeat the words. Nolan reportedly froze and stared at the reflection, as if reading something behind his own eyes. Marla said she heard nothing and blamed old wood settling in the house. The three carried the mirror outside and leaned it against the moving truck, then the mood shifted quickly. Hector claimed he saw a woman standing behind Nolan in the glass wearing a pale uniform. Nolan turned and saw no one, but he said the reflection showed the figure stepping closer. Marla walked behind Nolan and waved her hand, attempting to prove it was a trick of light. In the mirror, her hand appeared lower than it should have, as if the image was misaligned. Marla described that moment in a statement taken later, though she downplayed it at the scene. She said the reflection looked wrong for a second, like a bad video frame. Nolan told her to stop moving, and he asked Hector to look from the same spot. Hector insisted the woman was still there, and he described a face with darkened eyes. Investigators never confirmed any such figure, and the mirror reflected only the sky in later photos. They loaded the mirror into the truck and drove it to Nolan's shop, located near a busy commercial strip. Nolan placed it upright in a back room, facing a blank wall, and he covered it with a quilt. He told Hector he would pay extra, then he asked him to leave immediately. Nolan locked the back door and checked each window, then he called Deputy Shaw again. Dispatch logs recorded the call, but the note only said, "Mirror secured, requesting advice." Deputy Shaw arrived after her shift and met Nolan in the shop's storage area. Nolan explained the earlier incident and repeated the detail about delayed movement in the glass. Kendra asked him to demonstrate, but Nolan refused to uncover it for long. Kendra wrote that Nolan seemed sober, coherent, and frightened, though he made no explicit claim of a crime. She advised him to place it in a secured unit and contact the estate attorney for disposal instructions. Instead, Nolan contacted the Buncombe County Archives office because he thought the mirror might be tied to the house history. A records clerk directed him to a county file from 2009 linked to a prior owner. The file included a complaint about property damage and a handwritten log of strange maintenance requests. Archive notes mentioned a mirror in the hall that kept being moved and rewrapped. The notes did not name any cause, but they referenced an argument between a nurse and her brother. The brother's name appeared in state records as a former resident who moved out in 2011. According to a probate summary, the brother later contested the will and lost. Some locals claimed he disappeared after that dispute, but investigators never confirmed any missing person report. The county file from 2009 included a line about loud crying heard at night, reported by a neighbor. It also included a sketch of the mirror's frame, with a note about hidden fasteners on the back. Nolan decided to inspect the back panel, hoping to find a maker's mark or a repair label. He removed the quilt and saw his reflection again, crisp and steady for a moment. Then, reportedly, the reflection behind him showed a doorway that was not in the room. Nolan stepped sideways and confirmed the wall was bare, yet the mirror showed a dim hall. He shut his eyes, reopened them, and the image returned to normal. Nolan later told Kendra he felt like the mirror was trying to show another place. He set the mirror face down on blankets and searched the edges for screws or latches. The frame had modern fasteners mixed with old nails, which suggested multiple repairs. As he pried the backing loose, a folded bundle of paper slid out and fell onto the floor. The paper was brittle and smelled like smoke, and it held a small photograph and a typed letter. Nolan read the letter and then called the county office again, asking how to submit found documents. The letter was dated 2011, and the author used the nurse's name in a formal signature. It described her fear that the mirror was being used to spy on her, though she never named who. She wrote that she had covered it and taped it, and she asked that it be removed after her death. The photo showed a young woman in nursing whites standing beside the same mirror in a different house. Records conflict on whether the photo was taken in Asheville, but the frame pattern matched. When Nolan brought the documents to the county office, staff logged them as property evidence for review. A supervisor noted that the letter had no official seal and could have been a personal note. Reportedly, an archivist mentioned similar complaints from older households, usually tied to family disputes. Investigators never confirmed any surveillance device in the frame, and no camera parts were found. Still, the county office kept the papers since they related to an existing property file. After that handoff, Nolan tried to forget the mirror and focused on his store inventory. Over the next week, 2 customers complained that the back room felt cold even when heaters ran. Nolan said he began hearing faint knocking after closing, always from the storage wall. He checked building security video, but the footage showed only empty aisles and steady lights. State records showed no electrical issues that month, yet Nolan paid an electrician to inspect the circuit. The electrician found nothing abnormal, but he noticed the mirror was turned slightly toward the room. Nolan insisted he had left it facing the wall, and he had covered it again. Reportedly, the quilt had slid down as if pulled, though there was no draft. Nolan moved the mirror into a rented storage unit outside town, a common facility off a highway corridor. He placed it between 2 shelves, faced toward concrete, and locked it behind a roll-up door. He then sent Marla and the estate attorney a message requesting the item be removed from the sale list. A week later, Marla replied that the cousin wanted the mirror included, since it was listed as valuable. She asked Nolan to return it to the house for staging photographs, and she offered a higher fee. Nolan refused, and he provided the deputy report number and the archived note references. The attorney responded that the estate could not force Nolan to keep property, and he arranged pickup. According to dispatch logs, a civil standby was requested for that transfer, though it was later canceled. The estate hired a different mover, and that mover never filed a complaint or incident report. Nolan asked Deputy Shaw if the mirror returned to the house, but she could not confirm without a new call. Some locals claimed the mirror reappeared in the same hallway within days, wrapped in plastic again. Investigators never confirmed that detail, and sale photos from later that month did not show the mirror. Records conflict because the listing images were updated, and older versions were archived without timestamps. In late summer, Nolan received a call from Hector, who sounded unsettled and spoke in short phrases. Hector said he kept dreaming about a hallway and a woman who stood behind him, watching without blinking. He said he woke up with his hands clenched, as if gripping heavy wood. Nolan advised him to speak to a doctor and avoid the topic, since there was no proof of anything. Hector then asked one question, and he asked it twice. Where is it now? Nolan said he did not know, and he ended the call. 2 months after the estate sale closed, a small fire occurred at a thrift store in a nearby county. A county report listed the cause as faulty wiring near a back display area. In that same report, an inventory note reportedly mentioned a large walnut mirror removed after smoke damage. Some locals claimed it was Nolan's mirror, but investigators never confirmed the chain of custody. Archived notes from the fire file did not include photos of the mirror, only a description of size. Records conflict because the thrift store owner later denied ever receiving estate items from Asheville. Deputy Shaw kept a personal copy of her initial notes, though she did not open a formal investigation. Years later, she told a colleague that the case bothered her because nothing added up cleanly. Dispatch logs showed fear and urgency, but no crime scene appeared. State records showed a family dispute, but no clear motive for manipulation. Some locals claimed the nurse had suffered paranoia, yet medical records were not part of any county file. The only physical evidence was a letter that sounded sincere and a mirror that behaved normally whenever someone tried to document it. Nolan eventually closed his shop and moved west for different work, according to a business registry update. He never spoke publicly about the mirror, and he declined interviews when contacted by local writers. The estate house later sold again, and renovation permits show the hallway wall was replaced in 2024. No permit mentioned a mirror removal, and no contractor log referenced hidden compartments. The county file from 2009 remains archived, with notes that end without conclusions. In the end, the mirror's path is uncertain, and the accounts remain contradictory, reportedly by design or by coincidence. Next story. Door scratch. In late October of 2019, neighbors in Ashland, Oregon, started mentioning a sound that didn't match the calm streets. Reports described slow scraping on a front door, followed by silence, then a second scrape closer to the lock. Nobody agreed on what did it, and nobody could prove it ever happened at all. Caleb Wynn was 34 and worked as an overnight wildfire dispatcher for a regional office outside Medford. He rented a small duplex on the south side of Ashland, choosing it for quiet and quick highway access. He kept odd hours, slept light, and logged everything because his job trained him to trust timelines. The first scratch happened on his second night, shortly after 2 a.m. He heard it through the thin hallway, a single drag along the lower half of the door. Caleb waited, then checked the peephole and saw only porch light glare and wet pavement. He didn't open the door, and he didn't call anyone because it stopped after one pass. In the morning, he saw 3 pale lines in the paint, low enough to be from an animal. He photographed them, saved the file name, and wrote the time on a notepad by the stove. The landlord told him raccoons and stray dogs wandered through, especially after trash pickup. Caleb believed that explanation until he compared the marks with the gate latch outside. The gate latch sat at chest height and had fresh scuffs that looked like metal scraping metal. He asked the landlord about past tenants, and the landlord said nobody lasted long on that lease. The landlord then changed the subject and offered to repaint the door. Caleb declined the repaint and bought a cheap camera that recorded when it detected motion. He mounted it inside facing the door, aimed to catch feet and shadows under the threshold. The first week produced nothing but Caleb leaving for work and returning at dawn. Then, on the 8th night, the camera triggered at 2:12 a.m. The video showed a brief flicker of light. Then the audio caught a slow scrape, and the file ended. There was no figure in frame, no paw, no shoe, no shadow moving across the floorboards. Caleb checked the camera settings and found the clip duration had defaulted to 10 seconds. He extended the duration and tested it with his own movement, and it worked normally. That same evening, he printed the still frames and pinned them beside his notes. The still frames showed only the inside of a quiet hall and a door that looked unchanged. 2 nights later, the scratching returned, longer and closer to the handle. Caleb stood behind the kitchen counter with his phone in hand, and he listened without moving. He called the non-emergency line after it stopped, and a deputy arrived 20 minutes later. Dispatch logs reportedly show the call as a noise complaint with no suspect seen. The deputy walked the porch, checked the yard, and left without writing a citation. The deputy's name was Ryan Kolish, and he was 41, assigned to Jackson County Patrol that month. He told Caleb that coyotes sometimes jumped fences and scratched when they smelled food. He also mentioned teenagers who dared each other to mess with renters, especially near Halloween. Caleb asked if similar calls came from the same block, and Kolsch said he couldn't discuss other addresses. Kolsch advised better lighting and a sturdier latch, then drove away. Caleb installed a brighter porch bulb and replaced the latch screws with longer ones. He added a rubber sweep under the door to reduce outside noise and block drafts. The changes made him feel prepared, but they also made him notice new details. When the scratch came again, it seemed to travel upward, like something rising along the wood. Caleb didn't claim it was a claw, but he noted the direction in his log. Around that time, Mara Keene entered the story for reasons that seemed unrelated. Mara was 29, an insurance adjuster from Eugene, and she drove to Ashland to review a small water damage claim. The claim involved a different duplex 2 streets away, owned by the same landlord as Caleb's unit. Mara spent a day photographing stains and measuring humidity, then asked casually about tenant turnover. The landlord reportedly joked that the neighborhood had quirks, then refused to elaborate. Mara mentioned the conversation later because she recognized Caleb's address in a shared landlord file. She and Caleb met at a coffee shop near Lithia Park, and he told her about the scratches. Mara didn't laugh, and she didn't validate anything, because her work depended on skeptical detail. She asked whether he had checked public records for prior complaints at the property. Caleb said he had not, and Mara offered to look through county archives she already accessed for claims research. Within a week, Mara found a county file from 2009 that referenced the same duplex parcel. The file was not about scratching, but it described repeated calls for forced entry at a rental unit. The summary included dates, vague outcomes, and a note that the reporting party moved out quickly. Mara also found archived notes from a local maintenance contractor mentioning door replacement more than once. Investigators never confirmed a pattern, but the paperwork existed in multiple places. Caleb asked Deputy Kolsch about the older calls, and Kolsch said older records were inconsistent. He said some reports were digitized later, and some were entered twice with different categories. Caleb requested copies through a public records portal and waited for weeks. State records eventually returned a sparse packet with missing pages and redacted names. The packet confirmed a few calls for suspicious persons, and it left out the reasons tenants felt unsafe. The scratches continued, but they didn't happen every night, which made Caleb doubt his own predictions. He tried sleeping with earplugs and missed one incident, then woke to new marks near the handle. The marks looked shallow, like something dragged a thin tool rather than a heavy claw. Caleb photographed them beside a ruler and uploaded backups to a cloud folder. He also started leaving flour on the porch to catch footprints, and the flour remained undisturbed. Mara visited the duplex in daylight, careful to avoid trespassing beyond Caleb's leased space. She examined the doorframe and noted a slight bend near the strike plate, consistent with prior force. She also found old screw holes that didn't match the current hardware, suggesting earlier latch positions. Mara said these details supported ordinary explanations like break-in attempts and repeated repairs. Caleb agreed, but he pointed out the timing, always between 2 and 3 a.m. Some locals claimed the block had a history of strange disturbances tied to an older missing person case. They referenced a rumor about a renter who vanished, and they insisted the door scratches were a warning. Investigators never confirmed that rumor, and Mara couldn't find a matching missing person entry by address. Records conflict on whether any disappearance happened within Ashland city limits during that period. Still, the rumor spread faster than the documents could follow. Caleb tried to isolate variables the way dispatch training taught him during wildfire seasons. He tracked weather, moon phase, weekend nights, and traffic noise from the nearby roadway. He noticed scratches were more likely after heavy rain, when the porch wood swelled and the latch felt tighter. He also noticed a faint chemical smell on those nights, like solvent or fresh paint. The landlord denied painting anything, and neighbors said they hadn't used chemicals outside. One night in early November, Caleb set the camera to continuous recording for 4 hours. He sat in the dark living room with a flashlight and waited, keeping his phone on silent. At 2:48 a.m., the scratching started, louder than before, with 2 distinct passes. The camera captured the sound clearly, and it also captured a brief vibration through the door itself. Yet no visible movement appeared in frame, and the porch light stayed steady. Caleb reviewed the audio and compared it to known sounds from his job, like branches against siding. He couldn't match it to wind because the trees outside were still and the forecast recorded low gusts. He couldn't match it to animals because no paw taps or scurrying followed the scrape. He sent the clip to Mara and asked if she heard anything that suggested tools. Mara replied that it sounded like something dragging across painted wood, but she wouldn't guess what. The next day, Mara checked a contractor database and found a door company had worked at that duplex before. The invoice listed a replacement door ordered in 2011 with a note about recurring damage. The contractor's archived notes mentioned gouges appearing even after hardware upgrades. The notes didn't mention an intruder or an animal, only the word recurring. Mara couldn't contact the contractor because the business had closed and the phone number no longer worked. Caleb added a second camera outside, mounted under the eaves with the landlord's reluctant permission. He aimed it at the porch steps and the walkway, and he adjusted sensitivity to catch small movement. For 3 nights, the camera captured cats, raccoons, and one late delivery driver turning around. On the 4th night, it triggered at 2:19 a.m. The clip showed an empty porch, then the audio captured the scratch, and a light haze drifted through frame. The haze looked like fog, but fog usually rolled across the yard, not through a still porch space. Some viewers claimed it resembled cigarette smoke, and others said it was an insect close to the lens. Caleb checked meteorological records and found no report of fog in Ashland at that hour. He checked the lens for spiderwebs and found none. He didn't conclude anything, but he saved the file under a new folder labeled Anomalies, then regretted the label later. Mara warned him that labeling could bias his thinking, and she encouraged neutral categories. Caleb renamed the folder with dates instead, and he kept his written notes strictly descriptive. Around then, Caleb received an email from the county records office about an older complaint. The message referenced a prior tenant who claimed someone tried to mimic keys in the lock, but the report lacked follow-up. The final line said no evidence was located, and the case was closed as unfounded. Caleb wondered if he had inherited a pattern of prank behavior that targeted renters. He spoke to 2 neighbors, a retired nurse and a graduate student, and both said they'd heard scratching once or twice. Neither neighbor had called police, and neither neighbor had checked the porch afterward. One neighbor said it might be branches, even though no branches reached the door. Another neighbor said it might be pipes settling, even though the sound came from outside. Their uncertainty made Caleb feel less isolated and more unsettled. In mid-November, Deputy Kolesh returned after another call, and this time he brought a small flashlight with a UV filter. He said it was unofficial, something he used for checking graffiti and tampering. Kolsch examined the door and porch rail, then paused at the lower edge of the frame. Under UV light, faint streaks appeared near the scratches, like residue from a glove or oily cloth. Kolesh reportedly noted it in his pocket notebook, but it never appeared in the formal dispatch summary. Kolsch suggested the residue could be from routine cleaning products or from someone touching the door after smoking. Caleb asked if the residue could be traced, and Kolesh said lab testing required a clear crime and a cooperating victim. Caleb wanted to push further, but he didn't have a burglary, an assault, or a witness. He had sound, marks, and inconsistent records, which rarely triggered deeper investigation. Kolsch advised Caleb to document and consider a temporary stay elsewhere if anxiety grew worse. Caleb didn't leave, partly because his work schedule made moving difficult, and partly because leaving felt like conceding to something undefined. He bought a metal kickplate and installed it across the lower half of the door. The next scratch happened 3 days later, and the sound changed, sharper and faster. In the morning, the kickplate had thin lines across it as if something hard scraped metal. Caleb checked screws and found one loosened, though he couldn't prove it was from tampering. Mara returned with a handheld sound meter, hoping to compare frequency patterns. She stood inside while Caleb waited outside. Then they reversed positions. The scratch did not occur during their test, which made the equipment feel pointless. Mara admitted that intermittent events rarely cooperate with controlled experiments. She suggested looking at the broader timeline, including when prior tenants left and whether disputes occurred. Caleb requested lease history from the landlord, and the landlord refused, citing privacy and liability. Mara then searched civil court listings for landlord-tenant disputes linked to that owner. She found a small claims case from 2017 involving withheld deposit and alleged property damage. The case summary referenced a door replacement, but it didn't specify the cause. The tenant claimed the door had been damaged repeatedly, and the landlord claimed the tenant caused it. The judge's notes were brief and neutral, and the case settled without clear findings. As November turned colder, Caleb noticed the scratching sometimes coincided with brief power dips. The porch bulb flickered once, then steadied, and the scratch followed within minutes. Utility outage logs showed minor fluctuations in the area, but they were common during storms. Caleb couldn't link the dips directly to the scratches, but the timing bothered him. Some locals claimed the neighborhood transformer was cursed, a joke that still carried an edge. Caleb wrote down the outage times anyway because logs were his language. On Thanksgiving week, Caleb returned from a late shift and found a new set of marks higher on the door, close to the peephole. He also found a single muddy print on the porch, half smeared, with no matching second print. The print shape was unclear, and the edges blurred as if someone stepped, then twisted. Caleb photographed it, then watched it fade as the porch dried. Mara later said the print could be from a shoe that slipped, but there was no trail leading away. Caleb finally installed a doorbell camera with cloud storage and a wider angle view. The first few nights captured passing cars and occasional pedestrians, nothing that reached the steps. Then, on December 3rd, the camera recorded at 2:06 a.m. The clip showed a still porch, then a sudden close-up blur near the lens, like something brushed it. Immediately after, the scratching sound occurred, and the image froze for 2 seconds before returning. The service provider later attributed the freeze to bandwidth fluctuation, which did not satisfy Caleb. Mara reviewed that clip and noted something else, a faint reflection in the door window. The reflection appeared for one frame and resembled a light source moving low to the ground. It could have been a passing car, or a phone screen, or a glitch from compression. Mara refused to declare it a person, and she refused to declare it nothing. She advised Caleb to focus on what could be verified, like the repeated damage and the time window. Caleb agreed, but he also felt the time window tightening like a trap. In mid-December, Caleb requested a welfare check on himself through dispatch protocols, hoping it would create a formal trail. That request reportedly generated a new entry in dispatch logs, describing an occupant concerned about unknown tampering. Deputy Kolesh responded again, and he walked the perimeter with more care than before. Behind the trash bins, he found a broken piece of plastic consistent with a disposable utility blade cover. Kolesh bagged it, then later said it was probably litter because there were no fingerprints and no crime report attached. Caleb started sleeping at a friend's house on nights he felt too exhausted to stay alert. During his absence, the door scratches reportedly still occurred, according to the neighbor nurse. The neighbor said she heard scraping, then saw no one through her blinds. She didn't record it, and she didn't go outside because she didn't want trouble. Caleb returned the next morning and found fresh marks on the metal kickplate again. That detail made him consider that the event didn't depend on his presence, or at least not entirely. Mara found one more document that changed how Caleb framed the problem. It was a maintenance request from 2009, scanned into a property file and labeled unclear. The tenant wrote that the door sounded like it was being tested at night, and that scratches appeared even after sanding. The tenant also wrote that a back window had been unlatched, though no entry was confirmed. Investigators never confirmed those claims, but the phrasing matched Caleb's neutral descriptions. Mara said similarity could indicate suggestion, yet Caleb had not seen that file before his own notes existed. By late December, Caleb decided to end the lease early, accepting the financial penalty to regain sleep. He packed during daylight, moved his essentials, and left the duplex mostly empty. On his last night, he returned to retrieve a few boxes, and he stood in the hallway listening. At 2:31 a.m., the scratch came again, slower than usual, almost careful. Caleb watched the doorbell camera feed on his phone, and he saw nothing on the porch. He didn't open the door, and he didn't call the deputy, because he wanted the final record to remain unembellished. In the morning, Caleb took one last photograph of the door, then handed the keys to the landlord. The landlord said he'd replace the door again, and he asked Caleb not to mention the scratches to future applicants. Mara later documented her involvement in a personal memo, noting that records conflict and explanations remained ordinary but incomplete. Dispatch logs, state records, and archived notes supported recurring complaints, but they never established a single cause. Some locals claimed it was paranormal, investigators never confirmed that, and the only confirmed truth was the door kept getting scratched. Next story. Corner room. In Asheville, North Carolina, a corner room at an aging motel kept generating calls that never matched the facts. Reportedly, guests complained about a woman crying, even when the room sat empty and sealed. Dispatch logs show the same room number repeating for years, then stopping without explanation. Ethan Mercer was 34, a commercial HVAC technician sent to service rooftop units during a rainy week in 2019. His job was simple: replace a failing compressor and document coolant levels for the motel's insurer. He checked in alone because the company wanted fewer labor hours on a small contract. State records show the motel had been cited for electrical violations, but nothing about noise complaints. The manager, Dale Rourke, was 52 and handled the place like a tired caretaker watching a slow leak spread. He assigned Ethan the corner room on the second floor, saying it was closest to the maintenance stairwell. Dale added that the room was fine, though he avoided direct eye contact while handing over the key. Archived notes from the motel ledger listed the corner room as comped more often than any other unit. Ethan carried his tool bag inside and noticed the air smelled like wet drywall and old carpet cleaner. The room layout was standard: 2 beds, a small desk, and a single window facing the parking lot. The walls had fresh paint, yet the baseboards looked warped, as if they'd been soaked repeatedly. He took photos for his work report, then texted his supervisor that everything looked normal. Around 11 that night, Ethan heard a soft tapping that seemed to come from the far corner near the window. It was irregular, like a knuckle on glass. Then silence, then 2 quick taps again. He assumed it was rain hitting a loose frame and went back to filling out his parts order. The tapping stopped the moment he stood up, and it didn't return for nearly an hour. At 12:40, the motel phone rang in his room, even though Ethan hadn't given anyone that number. The voice on the line was thin and unsure, asking if he could keep it down in the corner room. Ethan said he was in the corner room, and the caller went quiet before hanging up. Dispatch logs later showed a complaint call placed from the front desk at 12:41. The next morning, Ethan mentioned the call to Dale, expecting a quick apology for a wrong transfer. Dale said nobody should have called Ethan, then claimed the front desk line was dead overnight. County File from 2009 described intermittent phone shorts after storms, yet repairs were listed as completed. Ethan asked if the corner room had been taken offline before, and Dale shrugged without answering. Ethan spent the day on the roof, replacing components, while wind pushed mist across the ridge. When he came down, he saw a woman in the lobby reading old newspapers spread across a coffee table. She introduced herself as Mariah Keene, 29, a freelance researcher building a piece about roadside motels. She said she chose this motel because records conflict about a death reported here years earlier. Mariah wasn't looking for ghosts, at least not in the way locals described them at bars. She said she tracked patterns in police responses, building timelines from dispatch logs and state records. She asked Ethan if he'd been placed in a corner room, then watched his face when he said yes. Some locals claimed that room drew trouble. Investigators never confirmed any single cause. That evening, Mariah showed Ethan a photocopy of a county report stamped 2011. It described an unidentified female found in a bathtub after a long stay with no forced entry and no clear next of kin. Another line in the same packet suggested the body was discovered in a stairwell, which contradicted the bathtub mention. Archived notes from a local paper called it an accidental overdose, then later corrected to undetermined. Ethan didn't like the way the documents disagreed because he knew how errors spread from one form to another. He asked Dale for a room change, saying the phone line sounded unstable and he needed sleep. Dale refused and said all other rooms were booked by a touring softball team. Hotel occupancy records for that week show several rooms listed as out of service, including 2 on the same floor. Late that night, Ethan heard a sound that wasn't tapping, but a faint dragging across the carpet. It started near the bathroom door and moved toward the desk, stopping as if something reached a boundary. He turned on all the lights and found nothing disturbed, no marks, no wet footprints. When he opened the bathroom, the air felt colder, and the mirror had a thin fogging along its edges. Ethan called the front desk to report a possible HVAC draft, but the line gave a steady dial tone and then silence. He tried his cell phone, but the signal dropped to 1 bar inside the room, then returned outside the door. Reportedly, other guests had complained about dead zones in the hallway, though no carrier confirmed coverage issues. He slept with the television on low volume, waking twice to the feeling of someone standing near the window. In the morning, Ethan found a damp towel folded on the bathroom floor, even though he'd left it hanging. The towel had a faint brown stain near one corner, like old makeup or rust from a metal rack. He took a photo and threw it into a plastic bag for later, thinking it could support a maintenance claim. Dale said housekeeping must have come early, but housekeeping logs showed no entry for that room. Mariah asked to see the room, and Ethan agreed, wanting a second witness to the details. She stood in the corner by the window and listened, then pointed at a hairline crack in the drywall. The crack ran straight down into the baseboard, then disappeared behind the bed frame. Mariah said county inspectors noted chronic moisture in that exact corner, but repairs were never itemized. They went to the lobby to ask Dale about the crack, and Dale became careful with his words. He said the building shifted, storms came hard off the mountains, and guests exaggerated everything for refunds. When Mariah mentioned the 2011 report, Dale said he didn't remember and suggested she leave. State records show Dale purchased the motel in 2012, yet older staff rosters list his name earlier. That afternoon, Mariah drove to the Buncombe County Clerk's office to request incident summaries. She returned with a thin folder and said the most interesting part wasn't the death, it was the repeat calls. Dispatch logs listed the same room number for noise, welfare checks, and hang-ups over several years. Investigators never confirmed a criminal pattern, but the calls often ended before officers arrived. Ethan worked through dusk on the rooftop unit and finished the service report for his company. When he returned, the door to his room was slightly ajar, though he was sure he'd locked it. Inside, the air conditioner was off, and the room felt warm and wet like a greenhouse. On the desk, his printed invoice had been moved and turned face down, as if someone didn't want it read. Ethan checked his bag and found nothing missing, but his spare room key wasn't where he'd left it. He searched the carpet and the bedspread, then finally found the key standing upright in the corner near the window. It leaned against the baseboard at a perfect angle, like it had been placed deliberately. Ethan later said he couldn't explain how a flat key could remain upright on carpet without support. He went straight to the office and demanded Dale review the security footage from that hallway. Dale said the cameras were down, then claimed the system only recorded the parking lot. Archived notes from a prior inspection listed interior cameras as operational, with footage stored for 14 days. Ethan asked for a refund and an early checkout, and Dale agreed too quickly for a normal dispute. Mariah suggested one more check, not to chase a story, but to document the contradictions properly. She asked Ethan to stand outside the corner room while she called the motel phone from the lobby. At 9:17, Mariah dialed the room line, and Ethan watched the door handle twitch once, then stop. The phone inside rang twice, then went dead. even though the lobby phone showed a connected call. They tried again with the same result, and then a third time when the phone rang without any call being placed. Ethan said he heard a second sound under the ring, like breath through fabric, but Mariah didn't hear it from the hall. Reportedly, the ring volume changed on its own between attempts, rising and falling in a pattern. Dispatch logs from prior years described similar rings heard by officers, then silence on entry. Mariah knocked and announced herself, then pushed the door open, with Ethan watching from the corridor. The room looked unchanged, but the bathroom light was on, casting a bright strip across the carpet. On the mirror, a clear smear cut through the fogged edges, like a palm had pressed and slid downward. Ethan photographed it while Mariah noted the time, then both stepped back into the hallway. At 9:31, a guest from a nearby room shouted that someone was crying, and he pointed toward the corner room door. Ethan and Mariah stood still and listened, hearing a faint sound that could have been plumbing, wind, or a voice behind the wall. The sound rose for 6 seconds, then stopped as abruptly as a switch. Investigators never confirmed audio evidence, but several witness statements described the same sudden cutoff. Ethan checked out that night and moved to a newer hotel closer to downtown Asheville. He filed his service report and added a note about possible moisture intrusion, documenting the crack and the warped baseboards. 2 weeks later, his supervisor said the motel called to dispute the invoice, claiming Ethan never completed the work. Company GPS logs placed his truck on site for 3 full days, and the new compressor serial number matched the purchase order. Mariah submitted a public records request for the motel's past police responses and received a partial denial. The county said some files were lost during a system migration and other records were sealed for privacy. One surviving memo referenced a welfare check in the corner room, yet listed the responding officer as out of state. Records conflict on whether that was a clerical error or a copied template that nobody corrected. In late 2019, the motel briefly closed for renovations, then reopened with new carpet and a repainted exterior. Online reviews mention the corner room less often, but a few posts still describe strange calls from the front desk at night. Some locals claimed the owner finally fixed the room, while others said the room was simply renamed. State records show the room numbers were changed during the renovation, but the floor plan remained identical. Years later, Mariah's archived notes remained careful, focusing on what could be verified and what could not. Ethan refused interviews and told friends he didn't want his name attached to a story he couldn't prove. The only consistent thread was the paper trail, dispatch logs repeating a single corner location across multiple years. Investigators never confirmed a haunting, yet the conflicting records left one clean fact: the corner room kept calling for attention.